One thing that I think is a proper symbol of the disaster of privatization is the old GLC building on the Thames, which is a gorgeous fucking building that used to be owned by us. That was where the mayor sat, or whatever the fuck he was called, the head of the GLC, Ken, when it was Ken. Sold off by Thatcher, is now Shrek-land or some shit like that. And the London mayor, they then built a mayor London Assembly further down the Thames, but it wasn't owned by us. We were renting it out, and now we can no longer afford the rent. So they've moved out of the fucking London Assembly that we built for the mayor and moved somewhere else. And you just think, we had a perfectly nice, gorgeous building that was there, and privatization is what, and who's getting the money? And that brings us to a topic that you do a lot of work around, which is privatization. You work for a think tank, Commonwealth. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Commonwealth?
So Commonwealth is a think tank that looks into, actually in a way, the Shrek experience kind of sums up our work in some really important ways. It looks into questions of the economy and questions of public ownership. So we have the GLC, and that leads us to the Shrek experience, right? So you have local democracy doing these really innovative attempts at funding models and job creation, and thinking about how can we make people's lives better by intervening in different ways in this thing, the economy, and with also an attunement to culture and democracy, right? It's local government, but in a kind of exciting and innovative ways. And then what you have is a situation where there's a de-democratization. They get rid of the GLC, which is also extremely unpopular. They have to. This is one of the dismantling of the left's thing. They break the union and they break the power of local councils and the GLC. So there's a de-democratization there. Another thing, and this is I think really important and speaks to a lot of contemporary things, which is the GLC was really involved in housing, right? And if we think about bits of London, there are boroughs in London where at that high point, half of the housing was council housing. Now that's been broken up as well. So you have a process of recommodification. So you had things that were taken out of the market and were given to people on the basis of need in a quite straightforward sense. People need homes. And they were put back into the market. And there's a very high number of former council flats which are now being rented out. And everyone who's young in London has seen this. Like,
I know. It's so common. I just want to jump in there and say that you see all these council houses, and particularly the ones that were like early 20th century built, that are like really good quality and better quality and lots sought after. And what you have there is often private owned. Maybe it's like a single landlord who very often doesn't live in the country. So like thousands of pounds are like leaving the country. And you go in there and it's kind of like professionals. I know people who are like doctors, architects, living in these council built houses and paying like over £1,000 a month, £1,400 a month. And you think, so where the fuck are the families living? If you've got lots of single professionals living in these ex-council houses, where are just families living who are not architects?
And that's one way in which the taking these things out of being publicly owned means that you can't match it up to need. And there's a massive, big housing list, right? And the housing lists are obviously bigger for larger families. So if you have a system where you have a lot of things which are owned by the council or publicly owned in other ways, then you can say, okay, we have this many 4-bedroom houses, we have this many people on the list, whereas that's disrupted by the taking these things out. So you have the loss of something which was once held by everyone, right? Housing, or in which, and you hear stories about people, in the 80s, even into the 90s, you could just like, if you put your name on the council housing register, you would get a council flat. And that was also one of the quite beautiful things about it, was that it was for a time and in particular places something which was for everyone. So you had a mixing of class there.
This is what I'm actually quite interested in, is because I'm not sure if it happened under a Labour government, but basically anyone could have lived in a council house.
Yeah.
And then at some point they said it's only for the like most needy, which is like a destruction of universal principles, which is often the first step at destroying public services. And so then what you then have is these estates lose any kind of wealth because there's not people who can afford to like spend money in shops there and whatever, and so then you get essentially ghettoization. So is there like stages of how these things get?
I think that overall timeline is right. I think when exactly it happens depends on different sort of local aspects, but I think with the way in which homes were taken out of public ownership, that's the most decisive factor there. Basically, is there becomes a shortage when there was more, right? And you know, if you hear people talking about London in the 80s, you just go to the council office. I mean, it's not like next day, but like you could get a flat, and that now is just not the case at all.
Yeah, my mum could even say no. She had options. That's what she told me. Yeah, she don't get that now. She was like, no, I don't want to live there. Yeah, and whereas it's kind of like, you live there. Doesn't matter how safe it is. Doesn't matter how close it is to your community. You live there.
Some of it is also, I think, in the case of London, I can't speak for the rest of the country. London has a reducing population for some of these decades. There's like a sort of white flight kind of thing going on. People are leaving London. There are bits, if you look at, I don't know if you're like, I remember when I was a kid, this is like before they made the overground real fancy, if you went on the train, there'd just be lots of unused space, right? Like run down bits of London. It's not that we're not talking on the same scale as like New York in the 80s.
Well, like Shepherd's Bush used to be like that. East London used to be massively like that.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And like you would have, whereas now, and no disrespect to people from Surrey, but you have a lot of people who like before would have raised their kids in Surrey and now are like, I want to raise my kids in Peckham. Or this kind of basically the desirable thing to do is to live in London, and I don't think that was the case in some of those decades. So as well as the kind of loss of some of the housing stock, it was just that fewer people wanted to live in London. I can't speak to the rest of the country, but I think there was that dynamic, and that meant that there's more and more pressure on housing as well in general, because I think that's a really big shift, I think, and that's, I'm not saying that's either a good or a bad thing. I think it's like it's easy to blame people from Surrey, but it's like we have to talk about this in terms of general trends and general what is generally happening over time. But it seems like that's a pretty decisive shift. But back to the Shrek experience, the other aspect is the ownership aspect, and as you say, they build this new city hall, they can't afford it, they sell it. I think I might be wrong, but the old GLC building is owned by Japan, so it's like, oh my God. So we don't even own it. It's Shrek. It's Shrek. We're leasing it to Japan and Shrek. And
well, that's so much with so much of those old publicly owned utilities or whatever. It's like the German government has a stake in it, or the Japanese, or whatever it is, and it's kind of like, I remember that during the Corbyn years, it was kind of like, oh, so we're subsidising German trains by paying like £200 to get to Leeds.
Yeah, so these are all major owners in loads of privatised utilities, and another big one, I'm not sure how they got in there so much, but the Canadian Teachers Pension Plan owns huge bits of infrastructure. And what happens as a result is that the company, whether it's the private equity companies or the private equity firms or these national other states, they aren't really interested in investing in the infrastructure, because if you own their bits of infrastructure, like say you own the tracks, or say you own whatever bit it is, you make money because you own it. You don't make money by investing in it. So you don't even act like a regular hard-nosed capitalist where you think, well, I'll put some money in this. And one thing, for instance, water, there haven't been any new reservoirs built since privatization. Yeah,
water is kind of one of the most shocking ones. I think I read, what did you've got it on your website, that like a quarter of
of the bill
that we pay for water is just profit.
Yeah.
And yet we're talking about shit in our lakes. We're talking about like no reservoirs being built. We're talking about leaky pipes and stuff like that. And you kind of think it should be, if you like capitalism, for example, and you want it to function properly, then you should be in favor of something that has a natural monopoly being broken up or being in the public domain.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work basically. And what happens in all of these cases is that these profits are backstopped, these dividend payments, whenever are backstopped by public money, and because they also know that, as we saw with the railways, when things get into a really dire state, those guys can go away. They're just like, we're out of here, you deal with the mess. Because these things, the lights have to go on, right? The trains have to run. They have a lower risk than investments elsewhere. And, you know, they make a lot of money from the fact that we're reliant on them, right? It's also that the way that privatization happened was that these systems, which were once integrated, were broken up into different bits and really fractured bits, especially in the energy system. So you have different people running generation, the grid, all of these things are separate. And that creates within that even more of those kind of perverse incentives to not invest, to not act in the way that sort of the regular function of capitalism would, because what you want to do is just use it for as much money as you can get. And that's it creates particularly bad outcomes.
Who are these people? Who are these people? That's what I find quite fascinating. Who is making this money? Who bought the Royal Mail, for example, and is making loads of money from it? Who is making loads of money from water?
Yeah,
that's what that's what I want to fucking know. Like these guys that are walking around, and every now and then, like what I found funny after Free Luigi, was that loads of CEOs started like taking their profiles off of websites. Because they, obviously, because they have a sense that, people don't like them.
Yeah.
And I get that some of it will be perhaps private equity firms and like pension funds, like you said. But like, you just have this sense, and I think there's this sense with the nihilism that we were talking about, that they're all in on it, right?
Yeah.
So the government, not only do they not have the balls to kind of say, like, stand up and do what's needed to be done, they're probably also in cahoots with these people, you know?
There's this sort of revolving door, especially in lobbying about infrastructure and water and these kinds of things. And like, you know, it's the way we've set up the system, it's more expensive, right? We pay much more for much less. And government steps in to subsidize. But they are also, I mean... sorry, let me try and figure out who actually owns it.
I mean, it's not like we're going to go to his house and find him.
Well.
Give it back.
So,
but like, it does kind of feel like with the water and stuff, there needs to be... What are they doing with the water? Are they nationalising the water?
I don't know.
There was some talk of it.
There was some talk, especially of Thames Water. I think when there are really striking failures, they sort of they go for it. But yeah, so we've got... 28% of water bill goes to paying dividends and financing debt. 4.8 billion withdrawn by investors from the water system.
I suppose it's just faceless people, isn't it? Who like put money in and want money to get out. And I guess as soon as the thing is with something like a publicly traded company is they are legally obliged to maximize the profits for their shareholders, right? Which is not how water companies should be functioning.
No, because you want the water to be good.
Yeah, well, exactly, and you also want it to be. What I would like to know, right? So there's this privatization with Thatcher where she's like selling things off.
Yeah.
And then there's a different type of privatization that comes with Blair, where it becomes more outsourcing and consultancy.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened then? Because that wasn't like Thatcher's kind of like selling the water, selling the rail.
Yeah, this sort of selling the family wealth kind of thing. So that sort of stuff, I guess, is more like And I guess it's things you see in the NHS and education, where it's not privatized, right? But you have people able to come in and make money in the NHS, or come in and you have like the academization of schools, and you have a shift in what those things are, as well as people extracting money, or higher education, the market. You say you have a marketization of it, but you don't have a privatization. But there are private companies who can come in and make money. So that might be things like student halls companies, right? And I think the biggest property deal in Britain so far, because there will be bigger ones, was for like student accommodation, because there are ways that these sort of public services can become useful to these companies, because you have a guaranteed sort of flow of income, or a guaranteed market, whether that's in students or in NHS purchasing power. And if you can kind of get your foot in the door, then there's lots of money for people to be made in doing that. So it's a different kind of thing versus the selling off of railways or so on. I guess that stuff is kind of present almost quite quickly after the selling off. There's this really funny story where, well, it's a ridiculous story where they get McKinsey in to run to look at the company that the
McKinsey is like a consultancy firm, yeah,
to do a private to run the newly privatized rail infrastructure, right, the actual tracks. And McKinsey, they come up with a stroke of genius, which is that they say, we don't need any engineers working on this anymore because engineers cost money. We just don't worry about them. So they fire all the engineers. They're going to go engineer free. And as you can expect, this does not end very well at all. They stop knowing when there are problems in the rail, obviously to the same extent, and you end up in a situation where you have a degradation of the infrastructure. You have a succession of really serious rail incidences, rail crashes where people die because they've gone in and they said, this is how it's going to be run. You also have then a loss of public expertise and public knowledge, right? So you lose out on having people working in those jobs, and you lose that kind of reservoir of knowledge. And again, then if we're talking about rebuilding that state capacity to actually build stuff and do things and have a functioning system, something that, we've had decades of exposure to this extremely extractive approach to public services, where you don't have the personnel and you don't have that capacity to make things happen. And this, I think, is also connected to this feeling that people have that nothing works and that nothing changes. And if something changes, it's only going to get worse, because that speaks to what it's like to get on a bus or a train. And, that speaks to the fabric of their everyday life, because they see things are getting worse. Politicians promise all kinds of things, but nothing changes except to get worse.